Good morning and welcome to our March 2018 customer webinar. Today, Christine Masters and Phil Proct of our product management team will review recent features and updates you may have missed and highlight improvements you can implement on your site today. We'll talk about behind-the-scenes advancements that make your site faster and more secure, new design features that you can use to improve your site's user experience, ad tech optimizations to help you grow local and programmatic revenue, and new and easy ways to boost audience engagement and time on site. I'm Aaron Gillette, Marketing Director at townnews.com. The presentation will take about 30 minutes and a Q&A will follow. At any point, you can type a question into the chat box, but we'll hold off on answering them until the end. Before I hand off to Christine and Phil, I'd like to extend a sincere thanks to all of you. Yesterday, the Local Media Association announced the 2018 winners of their Digital Innovation Awards, and townnews.com was named Best R&D Partner. Nominations come from local media organizations like you, and the faculty of the Medill School at Northwestern University select the winners. The stated goal is to reward partners who have been vital in helping local media companies drive new digital revenue or create efficiencies in their operations. We're humbled and honored to have been chosen. Even more importantly, many townnews.com customers were honored with awards, too many to name here. Congratulations to all of you. We're thrilled that we could play a part in your success. I'm getting misty-eyed, so I better let Christine get started. What do we need to do to refresh our sites for 2018?
Awesome, thank you, Aaron. Yeah, and thanks everyone who voted for us. And guys, we were all super excited in the yesterday when we learned about that. So that's we're really excited. So I'll give a really quick background of this as we're kind of starting this. Every couple times a year, we kind of do a evaluation of all of the new features that have come out, and we really look at the things that have worked exceptionally well. And then what we do is we revisit essentially we have the kind of like a starter site that all new partners start out with, and we look at the things that we will include by default on our starter sites. And obviously, you know, as most of you will know, you can always change stuff and you are in charge of your own site, but we do have a lot of recommendations that we have. But so yeah, every couple times a year we review that, and then we look at what's really working, and then we take those back as recommendations. So this year we thought that some of the things were just really good and were really effective, and we thought this would be a great webinar, not so much about the things that we've built this year, although a lot of these things are new, but rather our recommendations for coming up. So some of these things you'll notice there's a couple of things that actually aren't new features, but they're new recommendations for us based on changes in the industry, changes in technology, and things like that. So we really hope that these are things that you can, take back today and have an immediate impact on decisions that you're making, or requests that you might have to how your site is set up. We're hoping that some of these things you could come in and maybe swap out a block on the front page, or change up how some of your things are displayed on article pages, etc., and help give your site a quick engagement boost to help make things more effective. So that's what we're looking to do here. So we'll start off with a couple of things related to speed and security. The first one is, this is just a kind of a quick review of a lot of the things that we've been working on in the last couple of years, honestly, is we're really taking to heart basically the perception of how the page loads as much as the speed of the page loading itself. This is something that a lot of, Google, for example, has done a lot of work in this area in terms of studying users, and has really determined that the perception of how the page loads is as important, if not more important, than the actual download time of the page itself. So we've been really working hard on changing the ordering of elements so that the page itself downloads faster, and other non-essential elements in the page can load later as the user is now able to interact with the page. So we've done a lot of work in that area, trying to ensure that time to interact is as quick as possible. So we've made a lot of progress in that area. In a lot of cases, depending on how you measure this and the time frame, we've increased this on without the individual website making any changes. We've improved the time to interact metric by 20 to 20%. So we're really proud of the improvements that we've made in that area. And again, just by changing how things are loaded. In addition to some of the security changes that we've made, we're now doing HTTP2 technology, which actually is a new internet protocol that allows things to be downloaded at the same time. So if you have a couple of different CSS files or JavaScript files, previously there's a kind of a limit to how many can be downloaded. This way they can literally be requested from the server and downloaded together, and a bunch of other stuff. And this is just an area that we've made a lot of really good improvements. I will say that last year we came out with the full secure mode for the front end, and this is something that I would, if you haven't heard about this recently, the Chrome is now in July 2018 going to put a big not secure message. For now it's gray, but they're talking already about it being red or being other colors in the future. That will display if your site is running in HTTP mode, not HTTPS, which is the secure mode. So we would definitely highly recommend that you start looking at that if you are not already on secure. It is a bit of a process. You have to work with your vendors to make sure that your widgets and scripts and all that and ads and stuff are secure. But we have a lot of information on how to do that, and a lot of our partners have already moved into that. But just another chance to give you that that warning that we are going to start seeing that not secure warning on the page starting in July. Another thing to talk about, and again, this isn't really anything new in terms of features that we offer, but we do have we're continually evolving and changing how things work on the site to fight against different types of spam. And we do see the kind of bad actors in the world, I guess, change their processes and evolve over time, so that they can kind of combat maybe CAPTCHAs or email verifications or things that we and other sites like us might employ to help stop spam. So and again, like I said, and we've seen them continue to evolve. Now we're kind of seeing an influx of people who are they're legitimate users who are signing up, and then after they sign up and go through a validation process, then they start spamming. So we're kind of looking at different ways to combat that. One of the things that we are going to start doing by default on all sites, and again, I would recommend this to you, is for all new users to enable email verification. In addition, that if you're having user submitted content, make sure that that's verified. Have it go into a no publish review first, and then have someone on staff just do a quick review just to make sure it's not spam first. And then in addition to that, we have a bunch of things that we're working on now to, even if you're logged in, to have different forms of reCAPTCHA just to ensure that we're talking to humans the whole time. So we want to try to get bots out of the process as much as possible. And so that's something that we have some new recommendations for, and we are adding additional features for that as well. For design improvements, we have a bunch of things related to new types of blocks and new options on blocks that we want to talk about. Firstly, we are going to, again, on our kind of starter sites, be making a change to how our kind of default navigation and header is formed. We've seen really good success with kind of this presentation that we're seeing here, where you have the navigation. So if you can see the desktop version up here, where you have the navigation elements across the top. You might have some big items pulled out into the top here, but then the rest of the items are kind of in this menu. And when you click on the menu, it slides in from the left. It's also very mobile friendly. This is the standard, pretty much for any type of header design. We'll have this on our mobile design, but it kind of matches the same way. The nice thing about this is that it gives a lot of room for content immediately as high up on the page as possible. It also, some of the data that we're getting back shows that if there's ads, so you can kind of see this right here is kind of the start of where my advertising is on this example. Having advertising higher up on the page, either above the navigation or above the logo, it has the data kind of says that a lot of times people don't even let those ads load. They just start scrolling down the page, and those ads are not good viewable impressions. And so this is one of those things that a little bit combats that, is that the ads are a little bit lower on the page, right in the kind of target area where they have time to load as the user is starting to look at content in that area. So that's kind of another best practice that we're looking at changing on our starter sites. Time to read is a really interesting new feature that we came out with a couple months ago, I think. That is something that you have to turn on. It's not on by default, but again, for our new starter sites, we're going to start off with this. But essentially what we're doing is, we've seen, again, kind of in the industry, a lot of studies that show that users are more engaged the more information that you are able to give them up front. They feel that and this might be kind of a psychological thing, that the more information that you give them up front, the more chances they have to make a decision about whether or not they want to commit to clicking on something. So studies have shown that if you give them some of that information up front, how many photos is in this article, which we already have, and now this is adding how much time it will take me to read this. Again, it helps them commit to the click, and we've seen that this has improved engagement on articles by 5 to 10%. So this is something that I think is a really nice thing to have, and it's just an easy URL property that can be turned on. You can choose to have it turned on all articles or just long form articles. So depending on the type of site you have and the type of content you have, if you have a situation where you might be doing a lot of small updates throughout the day and maybe only one big article, then it looks, it might not look good to have 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, and that's kind of like, oh, these are all like really short briefs or something like that. So in that kind of case, maybe you want to just opt to have the long form articles or things with long form presentation mode have the minute, the time to read estimate shown, and that's something that you can pick and choose in terms of how you set it up. What we are likely to do by default is have it show on all articles. And you can also turn that off on a block by block basis as well. Another thing that's really, really cool about this is that we actually created this as an indexable value on all of the stories so that it can be used as a query rule in your blocks in order to pull content out into a block based on the time to read metric. So the really fun thing about this, and I'm actually looking forward to seeing new ideas that people come up with in terms of how to implement this. But a couple of quick ideas are things like having a block on the front page that is only things that are less than 1 minute, for example. And then you could call that quick read articles. And then those are things that they're just briefs from around the area that I know that anything that I click on, it's just going to be a quick, fast read that I can, look at while I'm waiting for another page to load or something like that on another, on Facebook. So another idea is just to, again, pull together your long form articles, so your deep reporting, your stories that have a lot of value and a lot of, it's going to take time to read this, and this is something you want to sit down and read. And so again, you can kind of pull things together based on just long form articles. So maybe things that are all longer than 4 minutes to read, longer than 5 minutes to read, that type of thing, and then those could be pulled together in a block. So some really interesting things there, so we are looking forward to see what you guys do with this.
Hey, Christine, quick question. How do you turn on the time to read for all articles?
So there's a URL property, I think it's in like the general group or something like that, and so basically you'd go to your front page and it will, and if you set it on that URL, then basically on all of your sections down below, it will turn on. It'll start showing on the article page, and then it starts showing on your blocks. By default, the blocks inherit from that region.
So you do this from the block editor?
Yep, from the block editor and then the URL properties. And then, like I said, you can override it on a block by block basis as well. So, so another thing that we have here is a new group of aspect ratios that can be set on for your images. And there's already in the URL properties of the site, again in your block design area, you can choose to have a default aspect ratio essentially for your whole site, and then that will determine kind of the sizes that we automatically crop things to. In this case, I wouldn't necessarily do these by default on all blocks or on all images on my site, but we've got two new ratios, an 8:3, which is a kind of extreme horizontal, you can kind of see the example here, that is really great for like top stories and top story blocks. And then we also have a 2:3, which is kind of like a mugshot size, but it can be really big depending on the region that you put it in. So the really fun thing I felt was if you take something like our feature block, which is kind of the example here, in the feature block you can go into that block and change to different aspect ratios kind of based on your layout or even based on the photo that you want to show in that block. And it can really make for some interesting layouts. If you think about a situation where you might have a really great centerpiece photo, but it's kind of a vertical basketball photo, even just for one day, you could go into your feature centerpiece block and change that block to be a 2:3 ratio to give you that big centerpiece. And then maybe the next day you go back to a standard ratio. So I just wanted to throw that out there that this is it kind of depends on your layout, it depends on the content that you have, but these two new kind of different aspect ratios that you wouldn't use on your normal blocks most likely are really great for creating interesting layouts and moving stuff around with some of those display type blocks. So check that out. We are like I said, we are probably going to have a couple of examples of this on some of our new starter sites going forward. So this is another really fun one. I do have, assuming we have time at the end here, I have a couple examples of this that I can show you on the screen. I think you might get a better idea of this when we see it on the screen. But one of the things that we've added are essentially the capability of putting a background on the block itself, in addition to which previously existed a background on the card. So if you think about this in the sense of this particular story is displayed in what we call a card, which is just a little box of content, and the box of content is displayed in a certain way based on the type of design and how it's set up, etc. So we've always had the capability of putting color backgrounds on the cards, but now we have the capability of putting a background on the entire block itself. So in this item I could have these cards are white, but they're on a black background, or vice versa. So again, you can kind of do some interesting things there. And then in addition to that, we have a new thing that allows you to set the width of the block and the content. So if you put a block like this in a full width region, you are actually able to have it go full side to side of the region, regardless of the viewport of the site, or you can constrain it to the content size, which means it puts it this way along this content here. And then that gives you kind of a strip of color across the background. So it's a really interesting effect, and like I said, I'll show that in a minute here, that is something that you can experiment with, or you can see some designs that we have coming up. Another thing is for the card feature block, and if you don't use the card feature block, it's actually a really great block. It has a lot of functionality, a lot of kind of fun design things that you can do to it. Have the headline can go to the top left or the bottom right, depending on what the photo looks like and things like that. So there's a lot of functionality there. But we've also added some new design options to this block. We have a color transparency that you can kind of see right here, where it just puts a transparent color block on top of the block. We have the ability to do a block of content regardless of if it has a photo or not, and you can kind of set the color of that. We also have some different headline styles in there. We have a fade. You can kind of see this is an example of the fade right here, which is kind of a common thing that we see on a lot of sites now. It helps the headline be more readable. So we have a bunch of options there in that card feature block that you can experiment with. And it's if you haven't used that block before, I would really recommend it. It's great for top stories, great for kind of presentations of specific display types. The mosaic block, this is a super popular block. A lot of people are using this at the very top of their design, kind of the top stories on the page. One thing that we've added, we had a couple of feedback from people where, just in terms of how it matched with their site. Normally it doesn't have any margins. It's on kind of all the photos are touching for kind of a stylistic look. And we now have the ability of doing different types of margins in that block so that you can either put a background on it or you can just have it be the same color as your background, and then you're able to add those margins to make it maybe match more with the rest of your site. So I'll show an example of that as well towards the end here, that it just, again, it helps kind of with how the site is matched with the rest of your site. And we might do that on a couple of our designs in the future as well. So infinity scroll, this is a really fun one where, again, this is something that we have done a lot of innovation on in the last year or so. We've gotten a lot of feedback from users and from sites that have implemented this, as well as done a lot of kind of A/B testing and looking at different implementations of this and looking at the data and how users engage with it, and all of this stuff we're tracking. And we have found that one of the things that we have found was that sometimes if you have the infinity scroll, usually it has ads every other story down the right-hand side. And one thing that we found was that sometimes users were scrolling fast enough that those ads weren't loading in time. And so one of the things that we changed was we implemented a new option. So again, it kind of depends on what your specific setup is. We implemented a new option where instead of having multiple ads load as you go down the page, it's one ad and it just sticks there in that one position. As the user scrolls down the page, it remains there on the page. So that's something that we've seen a lot of success with. Users seem to really like that. When you pair that with a refreshing ad, which Phil's going to talk about in a couple minutes here, then you have an effect where as the user scrolls down, that ad is 100% visible all the time on the page as they scroll down, and then every interval it refreshes so that you do get that effect of multiple ads, but you're ensuring that they're always visible. So I think that's a great implementation. And again, we've seen great feedback in terms of data from an advertising perspective as well as from user engagement. So user reactions, this is a really fun one. We've added these kind of emoticons to the bottom of articles that users can react. They don't have to be logged in, but you can require a login as well. It's a really easy way to kind of react and tell your feelings about an article without having to comment. I looked at the data on this last night, and actually to my surprise, love was the most used emotion that we had. I thought it was anger. Anger's number 2, but I always thought that it seemed like the angry comments or angry emoticons were being used the most, but to my surprise, it was love, which just tells you about, the innate nature of. Teresa's giving me a funny look here. No, but yeah, I think it's just a fun, interesting thing that can be added to the page, a way for users to react. I will say that one of the interesting things we do with this is we actually kind of track this data to both our analytics and to our data management platform, so that it helps us determine engagement with different types of content and which users are more engaged. So there's some really interesting things we can do with that. So ad tech, I will toss it over to Phil really quick to go through some of these things.
Great, thank you. So for the sake of time, I want to make sure that we have enough time at the end for questions and that we're all kind of being respectful of your time as well. So I'll kind of hop through these quickly, but before I do, I want to also mention that we did a webinar covering a lot of these things, a bit more in depth last month that I encourage you to go and check out. I did that with our Ad Ops program manager, Stevie, and we can kind of talk a bit more in depth about a lot of these recent features, but kind of speaking, I guess, from a site improvements perspective and what our recommended best practices are moving forward. A lot of this has data to back it up now, and we've been testing this and rolling it out. So I'll talk a bit more about some of the data that we found out, but kind of speaking of it from a best practices, what we're going to encourage a lot of our partners to kind of implement from here on out is going to be a lot of these features. So kind of speaking first about the DFP size mapping block, I guess I should preface size mapping. This is that code base that Christine was referring to earlier on site improvements and page load speed. This is something that we've instituted for all sites moving forward. If you're running programmatic ads, this is more or less improves the ability for those ads to load. But now we've also instituted a new block that's going to make it even easier to create these ads, and you could allow one block that's going to accommodate all of your individual sizes, whether it's large, small, or medium viewports. We've also created sticky ads. Christine was talking about this earlier. We have a few different examples here. We have the sticky aside, which is the left underneath the related content that you're seeing here, and then we have the side rail, which is on the right, which will start following a user, and similar on the infinity. If you're going to combine infinity summary scroll with that side right rail, then you're going to have that side right rail follow that user, as they're kind of consuming the content. And then we also have, lastly, the sticky anchor position, which is mobile friendly as well as desktop. So these are all, again, positions that we would recommend that are implemented into your site if you're obviously loading programmatic, or even if you want to throw in content in there. It doesn't necessarily have to be ads. So if you want to have a sticky right rail kind of promoting these collections that you've got, you can also do that. That's going to default at the bottom and kind of carry on with the user as they're reading the content. So again, those three positions, we have documentation and easy step-by-step guides to implement those. So I encourage you to go to the help.block CMS site to find those step-by-step instructions. Again, these are just, you could search sticky ads and you would find these instructions. And then we also have smart ad refresh. Christine also talked about that with the infinity scroll. A lot of these things are combinable, so you can combine a sticky ad with the sticky ad or with the smart ad refresh. This, of course, would multiply impressions for a given ad spot, and it's based, of course, on user interaction, which means no dead refreshes, which means if I'm a user and I'm viewing a site, I get out of my seat, I go somewhere else, these ads won't refresh unless I'm actually actively on the site and using the site. Again, we have our own internal smart timer that we have for each of these things. Right now, I think it's about, 15 seconds. Is it 10 or 15 seconds? And of course, requires that a user interacts with that.
Yeah, and that's one thing, too, that I think that we're doing some really interesting things in that area, kind of referencing innovation, where we're getting a lot of data, we're getting a lot of feedback on that, and we're kind of tweaking that. Yeah. We've done that several times so far to try to get the maximum value on that. We actually had some discussions recently of some additional things we can do to change some of there's several different things that go into that algorithm in terms of when it refreshes and when it loads, and we're kind of tweaking those all the time and looking at that data. So it's an exciting new area.
Lazy loaded ads. So this is talking briefly just about viewability. This is to ensure that these ads that your advertisers are actually loading, or if it's programmatic, are actually loading and are viewable on that for that user. This is essential, and it's becoming even more essential as we continue, but the point of this slide and what this feature is kind of doing is that you will likely need to implement lazy loading. If you're running programmatic ads in your site, lazy loading is essential and key to making sure that these ads and that your CPMs and that you continue to maintain the revenue that you're earning and obviously want to grow it. Lazy loading is an essential feature that you would have to implement on that site if you're loading programmatic ads. Higher viewability, higher CPM. So what we found out, every 10% increase in viewability leads to about 16% in eCPM. When I say viewability, there's a percentage here. Anything below 50%, you would want to try to get as close to even 50 to 70%. So that's the goal, and obviously you want to get as higher as possible. What we would encourage you to do is to obviously turn on lazy loading to hopefully get to that point. But we now can equate higher viewability to higher revenue and CPM for those individual ads. So yeah, again, a 1.8 increase in fill rate, as well as leads to 16% increase in the eCPM, and then no impressions for unviewed ads, meaning if this is on and that ad that you have, that bottom ad is actually not going to load unless that user actually views it. And then this is only, again, for Google DFP. So if you're running programmatic ads through DFP, this is an essential feature that you should be turning on to ensure that you're maximizing your revenue based on this metric of viewability.
And I will add one quick thing there, because we have talked about this in previous webinars. At the time, even if you had a higher viewability metric for your entire site, we weren't seeing a ton of differences in the CPMs offered by programmatic advertisers. Now we are. We are seeing the divergence now, as of like even just this month has been the most obvious one. We're seeing that divergence now where more and more programmatic advertisers are requiring, or at least bidding on, sites that have the highest visibility rates total. So your whole site has to be, 70%. And that's something that we are now starting to see, this divergence. So this is something that if you're not already if you're running programmatic ads and DFP and you're not looking at this already, this is definitely something to look at and start having a conversation with us about, how you can make those changes, because if you're doing programmatic ads, that's definitely something to look at.
Another automatic ads. This is to easily ensure that any stories that are loading ads in what we call in-story are that they're equally distributed throughout the story, and that you're not overloading them, or you're only receiving one ad for those short stories. So this is a new setting that you can apply that's called just automatic ads, and you can again search this on our help site, and there's step-by-step instructions on how to turn this on as well. So we encourage you to also take a look at that. And again, this is Better Ad Standards compliant, which we covered in the last month's webinar. And a lot of these positions are still adhering to the Better Ad Standards, so that you're not going to, in fact, get dinged by Google or by the Chrome browser if you are loading some of these positions. These are all compliant.
Yeah, and just to mention that again really quickly, we are in full activation mode now with Chrome, where if you have any ad on your site that is not Better Ad Standards compliant and you are found in violation of that from Google, they will block all ads on your site in Google Chrome. So if you have not yet heard about that, that's something to definitely look at. Get your webmaster tools set up so that you can get that information.
And lastly, this is kind of off of the advertising and talking more about kind of improving our product overset. We have an improvement to our business directory product. If you're currently a partner using the business directory, there's an enhancement that we encourage you to add on. If you're a client interested in Block CMS or curious about Block CMS, we encourage, this will likely be included with our marketplace product. But what we're now including, and the reason I guess for this is that we want to obviously better improve and make lives easier for newsrooms, is the request enhancement per business or automated enhancement for business directory, wherein we would actually fulfill these listings for you. So if it's your request that I want this listing to be fulfilled for this business, we will actually go out and fulfill the logo, store hours, social media keywords, description, and a few other things as well. So this is ideally something that you could just do in your newsroom. And if you meet this criteria where you need more help, if you are lacking the resources to be able to do this stuff on your own, this is what is kind of essential to you. So that being said, if you are, again, current business directory partner, we encourage you to contact your sales rep to get automatic enhancements included with your business directory. And then this is, again, part of our initiative to improve and to help sites continue to improve their efficiency. Again, this is going to be included with new business directory partners.
And this is something, if you had business directory previously and you had to cut staff, and so it was difficult to actually fulfill these listings yourselves, this is a really great, it's very cost effective, and it's something that is very easy to do. So this is something to look at again if that's something that you used to do but had to cut back on resources.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it. So basically the things that we, again, want to just kind of take you through here is we have a whole bunch of different design options, and options for your site, better ad tech that we have now available. I'm hoping that, we kind of presented a bunch of different things here for you to do. If there's any particular thing that you find interesting, that you want to try on your site, check out our documentation site. There's a bunch of documentation for a lot of this stuff, or shoot us a ticket and say that I saw this on the webinar and I'm interested in turning this feature on for my site or changing this particular thing. And we'd be really interested to hear what you think about these things, and let us know what other ideas you have for these kind of best practices or things that are working for you that we can help use on other sites as well.
Do you want to take questions now, or do you had some? I think you had some things.
Yeah,
you wanted
actually,
to show off.
let me just do a super quick.
Okay.
I'll do this just in couple quick seconds here, but I just wanted to show a couple.
If anyone has questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat box while Christine is walking through here.
Just a couple real quick examples here that it's kind of hard to see in the screenshots in the presentation, but just very quickly, I wanted to show an example of the mosaic block. This is kind of what you might be used to seeing on your site here, where you've got the main story here and then 4 small, and then you can see they're all kind of stuck together. Now we have the option for a thin margin, which again you can see there that there's a small margin in the center, or a larger margin that is more equivalent to other things that might be the difference between different spacing on your block site on other items. So this is just one quick example of that. This is kind of a real life example of that feature block with, now what I've done here is I put a background on the block itself. So you got this black background. I've got the that particular block in a region that goes side to side. And then what I did is I constrained that center card to be only the width of the site. So just very quickly, this is what that looks like. This is the feature block. In that block under general, there's block content width, and you have the choice of constraining it to the max width of the site container or having it can take up the whole region. So on a region that's full side to side, normally that block will blow up to go full side to side, but in this case, I basically said, I want it still constrained to my site, but I want the background to go all the way to the side. So using this, we're actually able to make this is kind of another example. Let me show you this one here, where I've got in this case, I think it's another mosaic block where I've got the background here going side to side, but again, it's constrained here. So we can see that that's just a way to kind of get those color breaks that go through the site that we've had requests for relatively frequently. So I also wanted to show just very quickly the example of a sticky ad on the right rail here. As we go down the site, you can see that my ad now is staying with me as I scroll down. This particular example will refresh as well every, I think it's 20 seconds, 15 seconds. So, and again, it's based on user interaction. So there we see the refresh comes in as we scroll down. So we have, that's a really interesting use case that you can add to your site and look at. There's a couple different spots that are sticky in that way, and you can use those with your article or use them on the right rail or use them at the bottom. There's a bunch of different options there, and those are all in our documentation. Thank you for reminding me, Erin.
We do have a few questions that have come in. The first one is, can you use the time to read query rule for quick reads if you've only implemented it on long reads?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a good question. Yeah, the value of the time to, it's called time to consume technically because it actually will work on other types of blocks. We're looking at implementing other types of content. So like a collection might have a time to consume of, 18 minutes because it's got 300 photos or whatever. So there's different kinds of things there. So it's called time to consume. On the story, it's called time to read. But yeah, it's actually indexed and recorded for all asset types, so you can query on them in that way. But the icon and the number is what you're kind of choosing as to when to show. That's a really good question.
Where do we find the webinar recordings? Go to townnews.com, click News on the top menu, and then scroll down to about mid-page, and you'll see a block that says Recent Webinar Recordings, and you can scroll through there and find the latest webinars. How is viewability measured? Does Google do that through the Google Analytics tracking code or DFP ad server functionality, or
Yes.
how's it done?
So there's several different ways that this happens, and Google does do that as part of their technology, as well as programmatic vendors will include tracking codes essentially that will look. There's like a pixel that's included along with the ad that will look as to how long that particular pixel is loaded and on the page itself. Kind of the industry standard is about 1 second for a large percentage of the ad has to show on the page for more than 1 second. There's a little bit of different metrics for videos, and basically it has to be on the page and viewable by a user for that time frame. If it is, then you get that called a viewable impression. And what Google does is they take a record, an average of your entire site for all the DFP ads on your site, and then that metric is what is recorded to your site. And when programmatic vendors bid on where they're going to place their ads, a lot of them will look at, I only want to see sites that are 70% or above. I only want to see sites that are 50% or above. And then different premium advertisers will pay more for the sites that have a higher viewability. And that's something that has really just started this year that we've seen that make a monetary difference. And we've been warning about this for a couple of years. The industry's been talking about this for a couple of years, and now it's definitely starting to be impacted. So that is something that is in DFP and in other ad types. It's not in Ad Manager. If Ad Manager really isn't for kind of programmatic ads in that respect, then that's what Google does best.
But you could be asked by your local advertiser about that.
Yeah, and that's something, like Teresa said, it's mostly for programmatic ads right now, but we are going to see, the big advertisers will, if you have like a big, Lowe's or something like that, where it's a national brand, they're definitely asking for viewability metrics, and they're tracking them themselves and possibly saying that I only want 80%, I only want 90%, and hopefully they're willing to pay for it. But that is definitely something that we're seeing as a trend now.
Okay, this isn't a question, it's a suggestion. When a user wants to add a business-to-business directory, instead of filling out a form, I would prefer it if they could actually build the business listing and I could just approve it instead of having to build it.
That is currently possible. So submitting a business listing, there is a new form that we've created as part of Business Directory where it's part of the user dashboard. They're directed to the user dashboard to create a business, wherein they fill out all the necessary pieces of that information. And then at that point, the business is either created after you've vetted it and approved it, or you have the ability to reject it and or contact that user to find out more information about them. So that is currently possible, and the submit business form that we had kind of a while ago has been swapped out for this new business creation.
Yeah, so if that's something, if you're a current Business Directory user, feel free to ask us about to walk you through that and make sure that that's optimized and set up. You might want to advertise it to your community that you accept Business Directory things this way. And if you were a previous Business Directory user, that's definitely it's a good time that we've added a bunch of really cool stuff, like the enhancements, like the user submitted management and submission of their own tools, and it's a great time to look at that for sure.
Contact your salesperson today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What is the name of the process that multiplies impressions based on user interaction?
Smart ads.
Yeah,
refresh. Yeah, auto refresh ads is what that was, and you can find that again in documentation. So I would search help.blockcms and look for auto refresh, and you'll find how that works.
And that's something that, especially viewability, especially if you're optimizing your site for viewability, that means that all of the ad positions that don't load on a particular user's experience, those are impressions that are lost, right? Because you're not getting to count those impressions that weren't on the page. So when you kind of switch to a viewability mode or a viewability optimization, you're losing impressions as part of that process. So what we're doing is using the refresh, technology to increase your impressions only when it's viewed on that user's page, only when the user is in the viewport, and then that's our way to counteract kind of some of those loss of impressions, so that we have more viewable regions. And one of the things that we did, like Phil mentioned, is we decided when we were doing this that we didn't want to do it when a user was not interacting with the page. So that's why we kind of added some additional technology there to track that we only do the refreshes when the user is engaged with the page. A lot of people will just do it every 30 seconds or something like that, but we kind of built in some additional technology there to make it a little bit more based on interaction from the user, which I think is really interesting.
How do you enable email verifications, and how do you turn on user reactions?
Good question. User reactions is a URL property, and there's also an option in the user profiles area for that. If you look at our documentation, this is all in documentation, or you can submit a ticket. We can help you with this. And email verification, I believe, is in the user. There's like user and then accounts, and then I think it's profiles for the user, which is where all kind of the user information typically is stored. But you can, if you do a search in documentation for like verification, that will probably be a good word to search for, and then that you can find that. And if you need help with that, we can submit a customer support ticket, and we can help you with that.
For the documentation on the design improvements, what would you search for to find the topic on the help site?
That's a good question. Most of these are covered in our weekly product announcements. But I think what we should do after, we actually have it in the webinar, is the kind of the show notes for this webinar. We'll make sure that the links to all of the different release notes and documentation for each of the design features are in that. We have them in the slides, but we can put them in like the show notes for the webinar as well.
And the show notes and webinar recording will be available early next week on our website. We'll send out an email when that's ready to go. At what length, what length of time does it change from quick read to long read?
That's a good. I mean, the kind of the quick read idea is just you build a block based on the time frames that you want. I think it's like you have to type in the number of seconds that you want for the total, minute equivalent. But if you say that it's, this number of seconds, then that builds the block, and then so you can define how you want the quick reads to be determined. So maybe in your case, you write a lot of articles that are relatively longer, in which case maybe a 3-minute story is a quick read for you. A lot of times that's actually a long read for a lot of sites. So in another case, that might be a situation where long reads are everything that's 3 minutes or more. So it kind of depends on your site, but that's up to you to choose how to build that block and then what to call that block if you have a better name.
Can we aggregate and display quick reads such that people can find and selectively consume the quick reads? I'm thinking we might be led to produce quick read summary versions of longer articles which link to the longer form article.
We'd have to think. We'd have to maybe if you could submit a ticket, we might want to talk about that a little bit more. I can't see a super easy way to do that without, there obviously there could be a block that shows 400 characters of an article, and then that links through to the full article. That's a easy way to do that. But in terms of kind of associating two different articles, if they need to be separate, we'd have to think about that. So I would, if you want to submit a CRM ticket and say that, we kind of talked about it on the webinar, we could talk through that and see what options we have to do something like that.
I've enabled the time to read, and I already see it showing up on story pages, but
Awesome.
Not on our main page. Do I need to enable it on each block, or is there a global setting?
The global setting, each block should be inheriting the URL property. It might depend on the type of block you have, or it might depend on if there might be a customization or like some CSS in that block that prevents that. But usually most of the blocks will inherit from the URL region. So I would look at what block you're using, and if you see that option in the block and it's not working, then feel free to submit a ticket and we can look at that.
Could be a caching issue.
Yep, could be hashing. Yeah, actually that's probably a good chance of that as well.
Okay, that is it for questions right now. If anyone has any more, please feel free to submit them while I go through the last slide here. There are a number of ways to stay connected with us. As we've said, help.blockcms.com is where you can find all of the documentation for all of the features and products we've talked about today. For support, you can call 800-293-9576 or visit support.townnews.com. The partner community is a great way to swap ideas with other townnews.com partners and clients, and that's at community.townnews.com. And to keep abreast of our service status, you can visit townnews.status.io and receive notifications of our systems and software services. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. To sign up for newsletters and email communications from us, go to townnews.com, click news, and you will see a sidebar there that says stay connected, and you can select the emails that you wish to receive and enter your email address to receive them. And of course, if we've discussed anything on this presentation that you would like to learn more about, any products or services that you don't have, please contact your regional sales manager today and discuss those. They'll be happy to talk to you. Thank you very much, everyone. We will talk to you again next month. And thank you again to everyone who voted us the best R&D partner with the local media association. We really appreciate it. Thank you.